If you were introducing Egypt to a group of tourists who've just arrived, they've finally gotten through customs and everything else, they're on the bus, you greet them, what would you tell them?
Hello, everybody. Sabah al-khair, if it's morning, I hope. And I'm very happy that you made it here. I know, many of you have thought about coming to Egypt for some time before you actually made it. And I'm happy that I'll be with you talking about something that is very dear to my heart. My name is Elhamy, and the meaning of the word is my inspiration. I have no idea why my mother, chose, that name for me, but I'm happy with it. My father's name is Naguib, and means intelligent. And my last name is Fanous, which is a lantern. That's the family name. I was born in a middle-class area in Cairo called Shubra, which was originally a big field leading from downtown to the palace of Muhammad Ali, the father of modernism in Egypt. I was born in 1944, and I was one of 8 kids of my family. My father was a salesman, and I think I learned, how to talk to people through him. My mother was a housewife. She went to school up to 3rd grade, but she was able to speak Italian beside Arabic, and this was our secret language when we had something to say that we don't want other people to understand. She also understood a lot of French, which is amazing for me when I think about it. Where did she learn all that? She also read very well. She was a good reader. And she was a very quiet woman. She would listen a lot and talk very little. But when she talked, she really meant what she was saying, and people were listening. So I think, the influence of my father's character and my mother's wisdom, shaped me. Of course, I was the middle child, so I learned a lot also from my older brothers and one sister. And we had a very small house, but somehow, we were able to live, all of us at one point, or most of us at one point, in that small, teeny apartment. Later on in my life, when I went back to visit my mom, I was always amazed how this little house and our few means were able to sustain us. But there were a few practices that our house had that, is known all over Egypt, is that people were raising chicken and rabbits and pigeons in the house. And so we always had a source of protein, which we didn't consume of a lot, but mostly our food was vegetables. So cooking and having the few things in the house, the birds and the rabbits, helped us through our years, even though there were very little means around us. Then I grew up, and when I was 5, I picked up a box of cigarettes that my father was smoking, and I looked at the writing, and it had embassy on it. Put my hand, my left hand, and with the chalk on the blackboard that my older brothers were using, I wrote the word, I copied the word. I had no idea, what it was. And I think that was my art skill, but my father thought that I was interested in languages, which was lucky for me because he decided to send me to a French school. And so I grew up learning French very early on. Later on, I acquired English in 4th grade. And that helped me a lot because whenever I moved, I had this love for languages, and it allowed me to read more, explore more, and I was very eager to know things about me. Actually, I was a very naughty boy. Whenever I was coming home from school, I would usually go around looking at, shops and trying to understand what these people are doing, and come back to my poor mother and ask her questions she couldn't understand, she couldn't answer. Like, I remember very well one question: Mommy, I went to this shop, passed by this shop, and they had jars with worms in it. What do you think they're selling? I said, I had no idea. So she didn't have an answer. I didn't have an answer for many years. But that kept me thinking all the time, what are these worms? Later on, with my readings and lots of questions to different people, I found out they're slugs that people were used to draw blood from, people's back as an ancient ways of medicine. Egypt has a long history of medicine, probably 7,000 years of medical knowledge, accumulated through the years. Some of it, is left out and some of it stays. So this is one of the things, that we're staying. And of course, nobody's supposed to know what these things is because very few people were using it. Even though in my family, my mother was using also one of the old techniques, which is having a glass cup and putting a piece of cotton with alcohol in it, dipping it, and then suction cups, and of course, that, when I grew up, things were changing, all the time, and the old practices, some of them would stay, most of them would be gone, but in the memory of most people, they know, what the things, because the language is so rich, and sometimes it picks up some of these old things and, imbue them into the modern language that people, are using every day. So even when people hear things, they don't understand it, if they ask around, sometimes they understand the meaning of some of the complex culture that, went through Egypt. I just remember now, one game that we're playing, and we would make a round thing like ring around the rosy, but we would say kolobamia, and it is, which means eat okra. And for a long time, we thought it was eat okra. Then we discovered later that it was a French word, qui est le premier, who is the first, to choose the person who will, start the game. But anyway, all these complex things, I lived with, and I enjoyed it because I wanted to understand what are these things around me. And out of this curiosity grew my passion for art, for architecture, and for ethnography, understanding why people are doing the different things, and I enjoy that.
So, what about your own academic background, your training, and so on, and what you ended up doing for a living?
Right. I was in French school, like I said before, and I moved when I was in junior high to an Egyptian state school, which was really helpful because I worked, better on my Arabic, and I studied, science, and I was hoping to be a chemist, but my grades were so bad in math and science that I had to go and study arts. But very soon I found out I really like it, and I concentrated on my studies, and I studied interior design for 5 years, and I really enjoyed it. And but when I finished, I really had to choose, what kind of work, and I had so many options, and I couldn't choose right away. But I also, was, called to be in the military, for a few years. That gave me a chance to, think slowly and not be in a hurry on what kind of things I like to do. So in the years between 1967 and 1973, when I finished my work in the Army, I had to practice all the things I learned throughout my life until this point. And I found out that I really, really like to go back to school. So I went back to school at the American University, and I studied the history of Islamic art and architecture. And I really enjoyed the fact that I know more about the things that interest me. So at one point, I stopped my graduate studies and I didn't write, my thesis. And I worked on the things that I love the most, which is graphics. And I started with big advertising agencies where I started by being the art director. I was never a graphic designer. And I worked for, 2 years before I discovered that this is not really the field I like the most, or at least the environment I liked. So I decided to do graphics on my own terms, choose my own clients, rather than the pressures of the, corporate advertising. And I combined advertising illustration because this is one of my strongest points. And I worked all my life, and this was my livelihood, doing graphics. Until the last 20 years, when I started being interested in other things, teaching art, the things I learned throughout on my own, and the things I learned from my choice professors and from my readings. And I started teaching the famous course of Betty Edwards, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. And, from all the readings about color theory, I started teaching also color theory in my studio and different places. And then I got interested in working with children, especially in marginalized communities. So I worked a lot with street children, boys and girls. Oh, sorry for that. It's children in danger. That is the correct terminology. I also had a television show for 7 years where I was taking children, from, to the houses of some of the famous artists of Egypt and introducing art to children through a discussion with the artist on their level. And then I would let them ask questions themselves, and we'd finish the visit by them thanking him through a piece of art that they would do and give it to him. I also had another one, which was a workshop with children based on art history and practice of one type of art. And my style was that I want the kids to explore all the possibilities of art and understand that it is coming always from the knowledge of culture. So understanding what we want to draw, what we want to express. And my aim was not really about only art, but about raising kids' awareness of the beautiful things around them,
Elhamy, can you give me an example of that concept, something specific?
Well, let's say for one of the time, for instance, one of my favorite, episodes was about silence. And a friend of mine, Osama Yaout, bless his heart, he was a famous interior designer who decided at one point of his life to quit everything, go to the desert and draw. So he spent years drawing cacti and really going deep into the spirit of the cactus, understand it. And he made some fantastic work. He didn't care if people saw it or not, but he had that hermetic feelings in his life, and he was able to put in his heart. So I took the kids, we went there and, saw his work. And I thought the best thing we can talk about today actually is silence. So we talked about, astronauts, who would go in outer space and really can hear the voice, the sound of their heartbeat, and how this is a very special way of understanding that silence is also very rich, and we have to really enjoy it sometimes. Talking all the time is not the best thing. And so, around that theme, we talked a little bit, and I had Osama tell them, his experience, and then we had a long sheet of paper where they drew their impressions of what he said, what they heard, and what they saw in his art. So I mean, that is the way we approach things. Sometimes from books, because it was before the age of the internet, and most of the time by stories and telling them about things that I went through in my life. Another time, what was really funny, I introduced them quickly to the history of the Mamluks and how they were wonderful people who built this beautiful, architectural masterpieces, but they were really mean people, as individuals. So whenever they walked in the streets of Cairo, people would hate them, and they would wash their floors, in water containers, and with the dirty water, when they passed, by in the streets, they would throw it in the streets. So they looked at me and said, "Why are you telling us this story?" I said, that people didn't feel that this is their country, that this country belonged to the Mamluks. It's not mine. So my house is clean, but the streets will be dirty, and we'll make it dirty like these people. But the question is, why are people still throwing garbage in the streets right now? We don't have Mamluks anymore. We are, real citizens who have people, who belong to us, and we belong to this place. Can we think differently? And so, I mean, this idea of mixing history with what's happening today with art, which was basically the practical part of that session, with let's make our houses smell clean. So I introduced a few practices, that people are using in Egypt and different parts of the world, how to make the house smell better. And in Egypt, people, back in the old days, would drink in old clay water bottles, and they would put mint leaves in it, or rose petals, or something to make the water smell good and taste actually, a little better, and sprinkle things around the house. When people would make fish, they would usually cook the fish and then cook a cake with a lot of vanilla. So the vanilla would, overcome the smell. And so, all these practices that, Egyptians used, having different plants in the balcony so people can use it for food at the same time, help with the smell of the house. And also introduced, something from the US where, I gave them an orange and we put cloves in it. And, the house will smell like the cloves and the orange smell. And people would, teach them how to hang it and, make the house smell better. I mean, all these things were the practical part of the workshop.
You mentioned silence. Could you tell us a little bit about your own experience with silence in the White Desert? Around the time when I was in college and afterwards, I made a point of visiting all the museums of Egypt, the famous one and not so famous ones. Then when I went to the American University and studied Islamic architecture, I had to visit some of the 640 registered ancient buildings in Islamic architecture. So I visited a lot of that. Then after I finished, I said, okay, so what else is there? So, I started exploring, Aswan and Luxor and Fayoum and Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt, all different parts, of Egypt that has a little bit of ethnography and history and architecture and archaeology. Then I got interested to visit the desert with a German friend of mine, where we went to do sketching and meditation for a week in the desert, in the White Desert, 70 kilometers north of Bahariya Oasis.
And it was an experience that I'll never forget. And I went back again and again. And my favorite trip was we started from Cairo to Alexandria to Marsa Matruh on the west coast. Then from there to Siwa. And then from Siwa, we went back again to the Kharga Oasis, the Bahriya Oasis, the White Desert, then back to Cairo, again. And Egypt is full of places like that, Desert safaris, are new to Egypt. And there are many people who are starting to come specifically for that kind of tourism. And there are so many ecologists now that are springing, in different places, to do that kind of tourism. Whenever you see a poster of Egypt, you always see the pyramids and a camel with it. And camels are really, really amazing animals. And the way they come to Egypt is even more interesting. Most of the stock of camels that we get come from Sudan, and they come in caravans, walking through the deserts, from Khartoum up to the southern tip of Egypt in Shalatin, and from there they're trucked, to an area called Imbaba. And from there, they're distributed to the rest of Cairo, Alexandria, and different areas that need them, because Egyptians eat camel meat. It's a little tougher than beef, but actually it's very delicious, with certain dishes. As a mode of transportation, it's not used anymore in Egypt. It is just something that you see around the pyramids, and people, use it for tourism. So in my mind, I have this contradiction where people always, relate Egypt to camels and the pyramids, where the reality is not that Egyptians do not use camels for transportation at all. And that has been for at least 3 centuries. So I want to just take a moment here to tell people Egyptians don't ride camels to school. But they're really, really fascinating animals, and we see them a lot. But my personal experience is that, in one of the trips to the White Desert, the organizer of the trip, my friend, got a couple camels trucked from the border of the White Desert to where our tents were. And we were surprised to wake up one morning and find them there, and I looked at the camels and I said, I always drew camels, from pictures, and, I never drew camel from life. And I want to imagine that this camel is called, and I can give it any name. So let's say it's, Samia. I want to draw Samia. This Samia. So I sat there, and that camel didn't want to sit still. So I had to draw whatever I was seeing with the movement of the thing. And that actually was the introduction to my newest form of art, which is, move your hand with the object, stop thinking, and let the drawing do itself. And it started a new phase in my art, and I'm very thankful for camels for that.
I remember when I first came to BYU, we had a Palestinian girl who was a student here at BYU, very bright. And she went on and got a doctorate in something or other, chemical engineering, I think. But I remember how irritated she was that all the students would ask her, so, do you ride a camel, every day? And she said, I've never seen a camel except in a zoo.
But we used to see them carrying product on their backs out by the agricultural areas when we were first in Egypt.
Yeah, in some areas they use them for transporting, how do you call it? fodder,
Yeah.
mostly in hay and stuff like that. So economically, it's a very useless mode of transportation. I mean, you'd rather have, the donkey do it, which is lighter and cheaper, or a semi-truck or a tractor, which are abundant, in lower and upper Egypt now.
Okay, yeah.
So you talked about studying Islamic art and architecture. Can you tell us about the religious context of your life and how that has influenced your career?
I was born in a Christian family, a Coptic Catholic one, which has the Coptic heritage, but at the same time has its relationship with the Universal Church, based in Rome. So we are a minority within the minority, the Coptic Catholics. About maybe 3 million at most, in all over Egypt. And I was also in a Catholic school, so I was versed into Catholicism very early in my life, which its understanding of its Coptic relationships, but the Coptic language was also only in the liturgy, at church, and there was never attempt to take it outside that. On the other hand, the Orthodoxy want to bring it back and teach the kids, how to speak it, and so I grew up really interested in that aspect of, can we revive a language to the point of using it in daily language, the Hebrew? Maybe, but understanding it and reading it and knowing its roots is very, very important. And then when I learned that, it is the last script, in the Egyptian language, we have the hieroglyphics, we have the hieratic, and then we have the Coptic as the last language, which is the Egyptian language written in Greek characters with 7 more added for the specific sounds that we need. I got very interested in that aspect of my religion, but I was always as an observer, and my mother was really open to dealing with everybody. So I grew up, with friends from, different religions, that were available, in Egypt. Then when I grew up, I married a Mormon lady, and I raised a family as Mormons when they were young. But I was always observing the others, and when my kids grew up and moved, to go to school in the States, I started searching, my own. I said, what do I really, really want for myself? So I started visiting other churches, and I ended up an observer, and I still am, until now. And that allowed me also, when I studied, Islamic art, to really try to understand, how every one of these religions is thinking about the divine and how they approach it. And I like that aspect, that, understand the other very well, do whatever you want, don't bother with what they think, and respect everybody, because every religion has some very, very sound principles good for this group of people. So be and let be. When I finished college and I joined the army, I was in the war, so, I was in the 1973 war, just at the end of the 67 war between Egypt and Israel. And I always had feelings that this conflict can be solved through peaceful means. After the war, I went back to for 1 week in the reserve. I was in reserve for a few years after I finished
my time. And my friend invited me to go and visit one of the trenches of the Israeli army on the other side of this, Suez Canal. And they were showing me, the different things that were left, in that place. And I got very interested in a piece of paper that was, on the floor. So I just picked it up and I opened up and I had tears on my face right away because it was written in English by an Israeli soldier to his family. And obviously the letter never arrived. And I was really touched that a human being who was not able to go back and join, his family after the end of the war. And it was very close to my heart because at that time, my own brother was missing and in the war. So it's we all go through the loss when we enter a war. There is no victory or happiness or joy into the feelings of a war for people who really love humanity.
You were very concerned about trying to keep alive some of the traditions in Egypt. Would you mind mentioning a few of those and what that mattered to you, why you thought it was important to keep that alive?
Right. Yeah. Well,
actually, and give us some specific examples.
Yeah. It go back to my childhood and how there are so many questions that the adults around me were not able to answer, and I thought this is a shame. I at least for myself, I would like to understand all the things, and I had this a few things that attracted my attention. I would just go after them, trying to understand, what happened and how they came about, and sometimes I would read some of the few books that were available on ethnography, and they were not satisfying. So I would read some more, read other textbooks from other non-Egyptian sources, visit other places, and I had so many surprises that. Many disciplines, in art history, where one person says one thing, and people keep copying him without, addressing that question again. And one of them was very interesting. The story of the sugar doll. In Egypt, we have sugar dolls basically around the birth of Prophet Muhammad, Mulid al-Nabi, and these are molds, wooden molds, where you put sugar and lemon in it, and some other stuff, something called manfaha. You add it to the mixture, put it there to solidify the sugar, and then these sugar dolls are taken and decorated with paper and some icing, and then sold to the kids, from very small sizes called ashash up to huge ones, for to put on top of some of the furniture in the house. And it's usually exchanged, between engaged people or families, and kids would have them and carry them around and end up, eating with them in the day. And all the books about that topic talk about a Fatimid start, where during the Fatimid times, people who have processions and, exhibit those dolls. And I took that with a grain of salt because it's not an art that started and died in a certain Fatimid period. It's continuing until now. It's changing all the time. And there are sugar dolls from ancient Egypt. And Coptic Egypt has a lot of it, and you see the molds, in different places, in Egypt. So it must be Egyptian 100% coming from ancient Egypt. But the book said only it's Fatimid. Then I traveled to Italy, and I went to the Folk Art Museum in Rome, and I found sugar dolls there very close to the sugar dolls in Egypt. So I took pictures, and I went back to some of, the experts in the field who wrote the books. And I said, can you answer me this? And they refused to answer. I don't want to rethink the topic. So did the Italians bring, the sugar rolls with them when they came from Italy? Who knows? Was it there, also in Other parts of Europe, definitely, because I saw it again in Austria. So, I mean, stopping and saying this thing is linear is short-sighted, you know. Everything has its origin, of course, you know, in the land where it's found, but it also, you have all these influences for around them. And I love, you know, a term that my professor, George Scanlon, coined, which is roots and entourage. You know, you have the two influence how things evolved. And I like to think, you know, this also about ethnography. And I was able to see that in costumes, which, you know, I studied, the Ramadan lanterns, you know, the beautiful lanterns that are taken from Islamic architecture, from the sugar dolls, and all kinds of material culture items that we see around all of Egypt. I collected a lot of those, and luckily one day there will be a third museum of ethnography in Egypt, more open to researchers from all over the world. Right now we have one which is in boxes in some apartment downtown Cairo, and we have one which is open, the Ethnographic Museum, housed within the parliament. So very few people have access to the ethnography of Egypt, unfortunately. The books are very scanty, and hopefully one day, you know, somebody will be bold enough to put all this together in the new museum. I have a dream that one of my relatives in Fayoum will be start, you know, that sometime soon with the collection I left with him. So,
I have a question. You use this term ethnography. How would you define ethnography, and how has it influenced your work as an artist?
I'm not an ethnographer, so I cannot claim that I can give, you know, the best terminology, but it's the life of the regular people in ancient times that changes with times and keeps many of its elements again. And that goes with the daily life in the house, outside the house, its relationship to architecture, and its relationship to religion. So all these different factors influence, you know, the way we do things in our daily life. And some things stay longer than others. And understanding the traces of ancient cultures and ancient and religion and tribal history in some areas, and how it influences how we see things is, you know, what interests me.
How does that influence your work?
Well, you know, I see myself as an artist who does two things. I record my time, because this is very important, and I also comment on it in my art. So I take, some of my work is basically recording something, like, you know, my costume series. You know, with a friend of mine, with Hamid, we worked together on understanding, writing, and I illustrated the 12 basic costumes that are in Egypt. Now, of course, there are more, but I made the important 12 that were found in different parts of Egypt. And in my view, it's a very important work because I saw people with my own eyes wearing those dresses, and I saw people not wearing them. So it's something that, you know, was available in Egypt very easily, and after 1970s, things changed gradually, and now some of the dresses are not there anymore, except, you know, in books. You know, some people use it, you know, for, you know, curiosity, and every once in a while you hear somebody who is really interested in wearing one of those costumes to bring it back. But it is not a very serious attempt of retaining these very important traditions.
What are some of your favorite places in Egypt?
That's a hard question. Of course, I love the Egyptian Museum. The old one, which is getting ready to move to the new museum at the pyramid, where it will be a complete panorama where you can see the pyramid, the Sphinx, three of the pyramids, three of the 108 pyramids in Egypt. So you can see them together, and next to them will be the Sphinx and the boat, the solar boat, the so-called solar boat, which is the boat of Cheops. And then very close by would be the new museum, where 5,000 pieces of Tutankhamun and other very important pieces will be. But the mummies now, as of actually a couple of weeks ago, were moved to be in the Civilization Museum, which is very, very important museum. And I had the chance to see it on its soft opening before they moved the mummies there. And it is the whole history of Egypt from pre-dynastic times up until the period of Muhammad Ali, the 1900s. So for me, it's very important for everybody who visits Egypt to see that museum, just to understand the correlation between the different parts and dynasties and influences that make the complex history of Egypt.
Again, quite unrelated, but when people go into the ancient Egyptian tombs, what should they look for? What are the things to notice there?
Well, I like that question very much because, most people who look at the surface, of these tomb paintings, think of Egyptians as people who loved death and spent a lot of effort, respecting death. That's exactly the opposite. People loved life, and they loved it so much they want to record it. So in their version of the afterlife, they want this life to be there with them. So they recorded everything happy that happened to them during their life, to take with them, later on. So it's, that feeling of joy of living that in the Egyptian tombs is there to observe and enjoy, actually. You have artists who seem to be put under a canon where they have to draw in certain ways for a very specific reason. And yet, every once in a while, you see an artist who deviates and tries to give us what he thinks. And we have so many examples of that. I don't want to burn it for you. You have to see it for yourself, because it's rather interesting.
I remember going with you, and you would point out even elements of humor, that you could see that someone was having a good time. There are little jokes and so on in tomb paintings. We sometimes think of them as being so solemn and grave. I think that word actually applies here. But they weren't. And like you say, they loved life, and they were showing it that way. So, yeah.
So when people think about Egypt, they think about ancient Egypt and the tombs and the pharaohs, people outside Egypt. How, if at all, does the pharaonic history of Egypt affect the life and the context of modern Egyptians?
Well, the ancient Egyptian history provides modern Egyptians with a sense of pride and belonging and originality. So many of the firsts in the world were started in Egypt, and Egyptians love that, and they love to talk about it. I would say sometimes it's a little bit chauvinistic, but it's understandable. But what some of us are trying to relate to our Egyptian friends and families is that Egypt is not only ancient Egypt. everything in Egypt contributed to how we are today. The Egyptians left a lot of their language and habits with us. The Copts did the same. The Islamic civilization that came to Egypt added a lot to it. And modern Egypt, has its own additions. So the Egyptian character is a mixture of all these things together. And let's take one example. So when we say, when a child wants to drink, he says, I want to drink, he says, umbu, which is an ancient Egyptian word, And people yell at each other in pharaonic language. They use it, in every day. It comes in our language. It's not this or that. Lakani walamani. That's ancient Egyptian. And a lot of the words that we use for agriculture are Coptic. When it's very windy, I think around March, if I'm not wrong, it's Amshir. So Amshir, Ba'una, Baba, all these months that are used in agriculture are Coptic, words. When our food, most of our food, a lot of our popular food is Coptic, medammis. And the word medammis itself, which is the fava beans, that is buried. So the fava bean, which is, the fava bean meal, which is used by most Egyptians, for breakfast, is basically fava bean in big clay or copper jars, buried in coal the whole night. This is how, it tastes the best. And the word medamis itself is a Coptic word for buried. So, all these words that we have, fanus, lantern, is also, a Coptic word. The lexicon, of Egyptian Coptic words that are in modern colloquial Arabic spoken in Egypt is so long, it deserves books.
What do you wish that visitors would learn about Egypt or about Egyptians that they often don't learn? Or maybe another way of putting it, what would you like visitors to take home from Egypt, besides souvenirs?
Right. Well, I don't know if the visitors will have a chance to see that or not. But at this point, Egypt is working on a 2030 program, which is really modernizing, Egypt in a way, to put it, where it should have been for, many centuries. And that includes a new capital that is being built for Egypt. It's finished. The central capital, which you are going to visit, is going to move within the next year next year. Most things now are computerized and digitized. And modern Egypt has a lot, to do with modern industry, technology, and it has a very bright ways of looking at so many aspects of its development. Without forgetting, of course, its roots. So at the same time that the government is building the new capital, it's fixing the old capital. And that is the reason, one of the reasons that, architects and city planners were thinking about Central Cairo, which is basically Art Nouveau and Art Deco, completely European, in taste, and quite tasteful actually, was not seen by most visitors because it was so crowded. Now it's not crowded anymore, and people can go, and with the help of the private sector, they were able to fix all the exteriors of downtown, which is really a pleasure to visit. It's almost has an equivalent, in my view, to downtown Los Angeles, with all what is left of the Art Deco and Art Nouveau styles. And we were not able to do that except by emptying downtown of the clutter and the merchants in the streets and the shops that were trying to change the character, of that area. So we're having a new edition of modern, and I mean by modern, from 1800s up until the middle of the 20th century. This part is being renovated for the visitors, to see now and probably better, in the future. The plan is to bring Cairo to what it was in the 40s, which people called, Paris on the Nile. This was the name of Cairo at one point, and we hope to bring it back. And with that, we have smart technology being used in the new capital, quite fully.
Wonderful.
Where is this new capital going to be?
It's already there.
Where is it?
It's somewhere on the road to Suez.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So out in the desert.
They took a desert, built a whole new city.
It's one of the things that Egypt is trying to do now, which is to get some of the population out of the Nile Valley and the Delta and into the desert, where it's not encroaching upon agricultural land and so on. So this is a change that I think we're seeing now.
Right. Yeah. Now, well, there was so much encroaching, on the agricultural land, and so what Egypt's trying to do now is go and do agriculture in the desert, which is doable. Many countries did it, and Egypt is actually doing it now, expanding to the west side of the Nile Delta, on both sides, making new cities. Egypt was living throughout its history on 4% of the land. I think now it's 6%. So, we plan in the future to increase, that proportion.
Yeah.
That brings across some questions that we talked about earlier, the concept of transitions that you've seen in your life while growing up in Egypt, not just that kind of modernization, but government transitions. And is there anything you'd like to say about transitions?
Yeah, Egypt was a monarchy from ancient times up until 1952. We have always, we've always been ruled by monarchy. And then in 1952, that changed. And with that, a lot of social change happened because we moved from, that era to being a republic with a touch of socialism, trying to do like Yugoslavia mostly, not like Russia. But we were friendly at the time from 1952 up until the early 70s, with the Eastern Bloc. And then when Sadat came, in his word, he says, all the playing cards are with the US. And, when he was in jail for a few years, he studied Mark Twain and read a little bit about Martin Luther King and other, American thinkers. And he came out, as a president who was favoring dialogue and, capitalism. So that shift was drastic, starting, with 1974. And Egypt was moving, in that direction up until 1982. And when Mubarak came, and we had a calm period where it was not clear, if you're keeping socialism or staying with capitalism. And I think we are still until now, within, that area where we want to keep some of the basics, with the government and allow the private sector to grow. So this kind of economy now influences, how Egypt is going to be in the future. Hopefully, we'll see a change where the private sector will have more power and the government, less power. And it's being seen a little bit in some of the areas. One of the of the things that are being done now is that even the government ministries are getting a private sector to take care of the administration. So the new museum, for instance, is going to be administered by a private company. So that kind of change is happening, and I hope, on a personal level, to lessen government control and increase the private sector power.
There are certain terms in Egyptian Arabic, like every language, that are sort of untranslatable and unique. So I want to ask you about those terms, and you tell me what they mean to you and what they say about the Egyptian character or context. The first one is ma'alesh. What does that mean?
Ma'alesh is a contraction of the word ma alayhi shay'. Nothing is on it. Don't mention it. So it's the way Egyptians express themselves, that after all, nothing is that important. You really have to let go. And it's the way people think, actually. If you think something is so important now, maybe tomorrow, it will not be that important. So don't really kill yourself over it, And you have another proverb that says, Tibat nar tasbah ramad. If it sleeps as fire, by tomorrow it will be ashes. Well, it's the way people observe time and the pace of life. So Egyptians can, go and visit for 3-4 hours, and when they enjoy themselves, they really, really do it. And they forget about work for a while and take everything, the value it is. On Shem Nisim, one of the famous festivals after Easter, people gather at night, they play cards or, have fun together coloring eggs, and they stay all night, most of them awake. In the morning, they go and visit the fields and enjoy the spring and the new year. So just when they celebrate, with a long time and have, fun with it.
So speaking of visiting the fields, what is the meaning of the term baladi? And what does that mean to you as an Egyptian?
Baladi is, anything that is really, really indigenous is called baladi. So you have, the most famous one is the Aish baladi, which I still miss, because it's the pocket bread with a certain amount of thickness, where it's the crust, is hard and the inside is soft. Very delicious. And you open it and you put, the Egyptian falafel, which is called ta'miyya, made of fava beans in it, with, greens and tomatoes and a little bit of tahina. And it's, very delicious,
What does baladi mean more broadly?
Actually, sometimes it's used in, derogative way, which I personally don't like. When the people who still cling to the class system look at something and say, this is baladi, which means it's below them. And so some people have that negative meaning to it.
When we would go to buy our bread in Maadi, we could get baladi bread or the other bread.
Shami.
Shami, yeah, shami.
Yeah.
And baladi was cheaper, so we quite often.
It is always cheaper, but it is much better, for sandwiches.
It was like a whole grain. It was like a whole grain version.
Yeah, right.
And it always had.
And they have bran on it, on it. That would.
That would be the chaff that I.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So it was not popular at the time when.
Oh, it's what we ate all the time.
Oh, okay.
Because it was cheaper, and we were.
Well, I like the flavor better.
Yeah.
Yeah, they discovered later actually that some of the people were cheating, and not doing correctly. So now we have a superior baladi, which is really the way it should be. The weight, the time it takes in the oven and all that. Actually, many people in Egypt, at night, they take some of the bran. They have a jar with bran on it. They're just a spoon of bran, like we do with the metamucil now and stuff like that.
So my final term that I want to ask you about is, what is the meaning of inshallah?
The meaning of inshallah is if God wills. And Egyptians, in all religions, they use it. They always believe, أنت تريد وهو يريد ويفعل الله ما يريد. You want, and he wants, but God makes what he wants. So Egyptians always present, what they call it, even present the Mashiach. I just put the will of God before my will. So it precedes everything that Egyptians want to do in the future. Are we going to meet tomorrow? Bukra, inshallah. And so everything has to be put with inshallah, because I don't know what will happen to me after 1 minute. So that's how Egyptians think. Of course, it's mixed construed sometimes. It means no, which is also, like most words, in Arab, in Egypt, it has two meanings. The positive meaning, which is if God wills, and the negative meaning, which is inshallah, means I will never do it.
I feel like one of your abiding life interests is folk culture, the good and the bad, right? What is Egyptian? What does it mean to be an Egyptian? What are the objects and the practices and the art and the toys and the clothes and the food? What are all of those things that are fundamentally part of Egyptian folk culture?
One thing that some of us are trying to get across is that ancient culture is beautiful, and you should keep the best of it. But the things that are hurting, you should stop. And my late brother, he was a urologist and a surgeon in urology all his life. But in the last 15 years of his life, he he went into holistic medicine, and he believed that 7,000 years of medical civilization in the world shouldn't be ignored, but shouldn't be taken verbatim at the same time. So let's go through all these old practices and see what's the best, and do them. One of his famous thing was giving a lecture at in Washington, to a group of people, and the Egyptian ambassador was there, and they became friends. They exchanged phone numbers, and at the end of the night he called him and said, Hafiz, my wife is very sick, and I was listening to you, and before I take her to the emergency room, I want your opinion. What do you think I should do? He said, well, put your hand on her forehead and read the Quran. I said, what? Dr. Hafiz, I'm asking a doctor. I said, just do it. I said, okay. So he went and did it, and she fell asleep. So he went back and said, what was that? You're a doctor. How come you believe it? He said, I don't believe in it, but she believes in it. I know she's a very pious lady from talking to her, and I know that your daughter is going to have, her muadla, an exam to be, a doctor in the U.S. tomorrow, and your wife was very anxious. So she had this heart palpitation, and so because she believes that the Quran can soothe her, it's good for her, without going into chemistry and all that. So it's that concept that tradition is beautiful, but you have to be careful, how to use it, for yourself or for different people,
This is one thing that just came to me, and you say something about it or not. Egypt has always had a sort of mystique in the West. I mean, starting with the ancient Greeks, they were fascinated by something that was so much older than they were. And so there's been a spiritual quality to Egypt. It's a place of mystery, ancient wisdom, and so on. Do you have any comments on that?
One of the best shows that I've ever seen in my life, actually, was at the Getty Museum a couple of years ago, where they had the inter-exchange between Egypt and the ancient world. And they showed the temples of Isis in Rome, and what happened in Greece, and the visits of, the different philosophers and historians, Herodotus and and other scholars who came to Egypt, and how the Pythagoras thing is actually taken from the Egyptians who discovered trigonometry, and all this interrelationship of the East and the West. It's very fascinating for me and very well done, actually. Yes, of course, Egypt gives and takes, and it's becoming richer, with exchange. The horse was introduced in the 12th dynasty, not early, and the chicken were not eaten until, very late dynasty. I think New Kingdom, They used to eat ducks and geese and, other birds before, the chicken was introduced. So, this influences were there all the time, to and from Egypt,
One last question. They will be noticing the beautiful domes, the carved domes. Do you have anything you could say about that so they have a sense of what it is they're looking at?
Yeah. One of the nicest things about Islamic architecture, it is related to dynasties. So you look at the skyline of Cairo and you see a pencil minaret, and that is after 1517. You see a certain dome with a certain design on it. It's early Mamluk or late Mamluk. So even within one dynasty, you can see the change. You see a square or an octagon minaret, and it's Ayyubid. So you can see the changes of architectural styles from dome to dome, and from minaret to minaret. And many scholars actually use that, to help people navigate through the evolution of Islamic architecture, of Cairo. But I hope the visitors have a chance to be in one high spot, like by the Citadel and the Muhammad Ali Mosque, where they can see all the different, minarets and different domes, and appreciate the variations on the one theme. Yeah. By mentioning, the city of the dead, the Muslims actually ritually have to bury the body into the ground with no cenotaph, nothing to show off. But we have to understand that the Mamluks came from Europe, from northern Yugoslavia and different places in the West, and they came with their traditions. So the idea of having something on the tomb has to be there. So they had to negotiate politically with Al-Azhar, the authority in Islam at the time, how to work around having some building on top of the dead body. So they came up with the concept of the madrasa, school, mausoleum, and mosque together, and sometimes sabil. So in one complex, you have a sabil kutab, which is teaching the kids how to read and write, and give water to and shelter for the people who are traveling. And then you have the madrasa, which is teaching, different sciences, including the religious sciences. And then the mausoleum, where the person, the sultan, the king, would be buried. And then the mosque, allowing for the 4 schools of interpretation, the Malki, the Shafi'i, the Hanafi, and the Hanbali, to study side by side in the same mosque. So when you say the city of the dead. This is not correct. This city has complexes that include, all the 4 or 5 aspects, of religion in Islam.